Welcome back. We're staying with the rise in coronavirus cases here in Israel, with the numbers of fresh infections jumping to around 1,000 every day, with Israel's government warning it may impose another full lockdown. Let's go now live to our correspondent Ellie Hockenberg, who joins me from Herzliya. Ellie, thank you so much for joining me today. As we've just spoken with Emily Rose, this another full lockdown is definitely something that most people do not want. And Ellie, we know that the Corona Cabinet meeting wrapped up just a few hours ago with these new restrictions imposed. But of course, as we see a lot in Israeli politics, not really everyone in agreement.
That's perhaps an understatement, Sarah. We're seeing harsh disagreements both within the coalition and, of course, some backlash from the opposition. From within the coalition, this cabinet session today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his fellow cabinet members very clearly, guys, this is time to put all of our political interests aside. I know that each and every one of you is a minister for something and wants to make sure that his own territory is secured or safe to an extent, but this is the time to see the overall picture, to try and put aside all the political bickering and disagreements and simply stand united as we're announcing those new restrictions that the public, of course, is frustrated to see after Israel relatively succeeded in containing the first wave of the pandemic. And indeed, we're seeing at least for the time being, cabinet ministers backing the decision to present new restrictions that are, most of them are still pending the approval of Parliament. And in this respect, Sarah, the coalition is seeking to bypass Parliament to limit its oversight. At this point in time, every new restriction that is introduced by cabinet, not in a special order, needs to go through either a parliamentary committee or a plenum session that will approve those restrictions. The coalition now wants to legislate a law that will bypass this procedure, meaning that any new restriction that will be presented in the coming weeks will be automatically green-lighted by the cabinet itself without further discussion in Parliament. From the opposition, unsurprisingly, we're hearing harsh backlash on the handling or lack thereof of the coalition amidst, of course, this resurgence of the pandemic. Avigdor Lieberman, leader of the Israel pt2 party, is even taking perhaps an extra step, if you will, and calling on the public. He had a faction meeting earlier today with the representatives from the restaurant business, the bars, the clubs that are getting shut down today. The restaurants will be limited in their capacity, and he was urging them to act more aggressively, to stop being gentlemen, as he put it. So the opposition, again, is trying to trigger some action or reactions, rather, from the public, and not to limit their fight in the coalition to the frameworks of the Israeli parliament, Sarah.
And Ellie, we are expecting an address by Health Minister Yuli Edelstein in just under 2 hours on Israeli media. And of course, this full lockdown is something, as I mentioned, that really nobody wants. We saw the awful impact it had on the economy last time around. Really, how likely is it that the Israeli government may do that again, given the effect it had on Israel's economy?
Well, according to the statements earlier in the day in cabinet, both by Benjamin Netanyahu and Health Minister Yuli Edelstein, as you said, is expected to speak to the public in a couple of hours from now. Those measures that were introduced today, short days after the most recent measures this cabinet approved, are drastic to an extent, but they will be able to prevent a pending lockdown. Benjamin Netanyahu, backed by the National Security Agency chief, telling cabinet members, we are facing a potential lockdown unless we act now, immediately and drastically. And these are the measures we're seeing being introduced today, all in a bid to prevent another full lockdown as early as next week, Sarah.
Okay, Ellie Hockenberg there. Thanks for the update, and we will, of course, come back to you a little later on. Moving on, and the Israel Defense Forces has launched airstrikes against a number of Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip after operatives in the enclave fired 3 rockets into southern Israel early last night. Israeli attack choppers and fighter jets reportedly hit targets labelled as underground infrastructure belonging to Hamas, although it's still not clear who fired the missiles. Here's Defence Minister Benny Gantz speaking from the border earlier today.
We have only 2 interests in the Gaza Strip: bringing back the boys and a quiet border. If it does not end and the attacks continue, the IDF's responses will continue.
And our correspondent Pierre Clochendler is standing by for us on the Israel-Gaza border. Hello there, Pierre. Thanks so much for joining us. Firstly, as I mentioned, still no claim as to who was behind this rocket fire overnight. Any word on that yet?
Absolutely, Sarah. And there was a rare acknowledgement by the Israeli military yesterday night that they were still looking into who did launch those rockets, and there's no answer. And probably that was a unique incident in a sense. Of course, the army blamed Hamas for not training on potential, activists, militants, whatever you call them, from launching rockets onto Israeli territory. But obviously, this is a puzzling question, and it seems that for the army, this is just one solitary incident. We just cruised the border, and there's no Israeli army roadblocks on the vicinity of the border, which is just less than half a mile away from where I'm standing, and it's very quiet. Usually when Israel expects that there's going to be an upsurge of tension, there are roadblocks, and there's none except for the buzz of some drone, which is a fixture on the border. There is nothing really happening at this moment. That doesn't mean that, again, some militant will decide to take his own initiative and launch another rocket on Israeli news, on Israeli primetime news, as yesterday.
All right, Pierre Clochendler there. Thank you so much for that perspective from the Israel-Gaza border. We'll come back to you a little later on. Moving now to Iran, and its Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif has come out to address the Foreign Ministry, saying that both countries are feeling the pressure from Iran and the growth and progress it's making. Now, these remarks a day after the commander of the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps came out to say that Iran has developed underground cities along its southern coastline which can house vessels and missiles. Now, in the same meeting, Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister for Political Affairs Abbas Araghchi told those in attendance that the US is currently pursuing its main objective, that is to once again send Iran to the UN Security Council, and has mobilised all its power to this effect, adding that such a dangerous game may cause strategic damage for Iran if the Iranian side played into the US's hands. Meanwhile, a New York Times report is citing a Middle East intelligence official claiming that Israel was behind a powerful bomb that damaged a significant portion of the advanced uranium centrifuge facility in Natanz in Iran, although the same unnamed official is denying an Israeli connection to other blasts in the Islamic Republic. Now, satellite images of the site published on Sunday appear to show more damage than what Tehran had initially disclosed. For now, Iranian officials have gone as far as admitting that an explosive device was used in the incident and that considerable damage occurred. Earlier on our show, The Rundown, New York Times journalist Ronan Bergman spoke to us about the latest events in Iran and the implications if Israel is responsible.
If Israel, and of course, we're still waiting for more reporting on that. But if Israel was behind or will be behind any kind of attacks, it will attack what it sees as a existential threat. And this is the Iranian nuclear project, and nothing else. If Iran would stop or would not repeat its attempts to damage, to have cyber strikes against Israeli civilian infrastructure, as it did in April against the water plant. So I think there is a tendency, of course, to see some few accidents on a timeline and say, oh, they must be all connected. And I'm sure that many Iranians, including Iranian decision makers, believe that these are all connected. But you need much more reporting, much more footnotes in order to say that some things are connected. Besides the fact that they are in interesting proximity on the timeline.
Well, perhaps we'll get more facts on this in the coming days or weeks, especially on that incident in Nantes. Ronen Bergman.
Just last remark.
In 10 seconds.
If indeed the one in Natanz, and I believe it was the
Ronen, with 10 seconds.
Deliberate, was a sabotage. Then this is the beginning of something new.
Israel launched a new reconnaissance satellite, pt2 into orbit overnight with new surveillance capabilities. Its mission to help Israel monitor Iranian and Hezbollah forces in the region. Alec Pollard has the details.
Another success for Israel's military satellite program. pt2, the 12th in the series since the first launch back in 1988, is now in orbit. pt2 is an upgraded version compared with its little brother, pt11, which was launched in 2016. Its camera, developed with Israeli company Elbit Systems, can produce some of the world's highest resolution pictures from space. Israel's satellites play an important role in the silent but all-important intelligence wars taking place in the Middle East, especially against Israel's regional archenemy, Iran, which launched its first military satellite, named Nul, back in April.
Yes, we took a lead, but they will be after us, and we'll try to achieve some gains as well. So I would argue it's part of an ongoing and a long struggle that might continue for some years at least.
pt2 will help Israel keep the upper hand and keep more than just two eyes on its enemy's movements.
And finally, a new possible security risk has been flagged by an Israeli official just today, following a move by the US to allow American companies to provide clearer satellite images of Israel and the Palestinian territories. Now, under a 1997 US regulation, such satellite images used on Google Earth, for example, can only show items no smaller than 2 meters resolution. Now, the issue is important to Israel as officials worry that Lebanon's Hezbollah and Gaza's Hamas militants could use commercial satellite images to plan precise rocket strikes on key civilian and military infrastructure. And that is all we have time for this edition of i24 News. But of course, we are continuing to bring you all of the breaking stories. So do go ahead, visit us online. That's i24news.tv. And we have all of those stories on all of our social media platforms. I'm Sarah Coates, and we'll be back at the top of the hour.